Now, in a organizational market, unlike in the case of a customer, where there can be very few kind of people playing a role, in the case of an organization, there are multiple people who play a role. For example, if you take a typical product, there can be somebody who is the final user, okay, but there will be somebody else who initiates the process of buying, and somebody else who plays an influence in the buying process, somebody else who actually decides on which product to buy, and somebody else who may actually be the person who pays for it. So let's take a look at these critical people, because when you're dealing with the business market or an organization, you have to understand the roles of different key people, because each of them have different things which appeal to them, and you need to appeal to all of them. This is the initiator, is a person who requests for something to be purchased. Typically, they can be users, but they can also be somebody who might use the output of users or has an influence on how the user works. The user is a critical person. He is the one who actually uses the product. It is his inputs that can play a key role in determining which product or alternative is chosen or retained. Influencers are people who play a key role in terms of figuring out what alternatives exist, what things should be considered while making a product, by buying a product, and so on and so forth. And there are very many kinds of influencers. They play different roles in different organizations. For example, R&D specialists who might be working within a company can influence what the technical or ops guys actually end up using. And finally, there are those who decide. It could be the general manager in some cases, it could be the CEO in some cases. They're the persons who actually take the decision which company to go with, which product to buy, and so on and so forth. There are also other kinds of people who are not so well known. One is the gatekeepers. Sometimes these could be consultants or purchasing agents. Many times you will find the typical gatekeeper tends to be the secretary to a key executive, or even the receptionist, or even the security person at the gate, who may not let you even enter the premises. There are people who are approvers, who need to authorize various purchases that are being made within the company, who might review the purchase process. And finally, there are also people who are the actual buyers. Many companies have what is called a purchase department, and whose role is looking at the purchase process, figuring out who to buy from, what kind of buying process to have, and so on and so forth. Now, in each of these cases, you will find that there are different motives. And let's look at some of the motives and why those motives exist. For example, one key motive is efficiency. Today, most companies know that they have to be competitive, and there are several things which help you be competitive. It is, a couple of things are effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness, as many of you know, is doing the right thing, and efficiency is doing things right. So how can this help you in improving your performance at an overall level? That's key. Second thing is economy, value for money. Am I getting, things for the right kind of money, is being used properly? Am I getting it in better time? Third is in terms of quality. For example, it could be the quality of the workmanship of the product that you supply, or the quality of the materials that you use. You will see, for example, when you buy various kinds of products, example textiles, there is a difference based on the quality of the material that is being purchased. Also in terms of simplicity, because the more simple things are, the more easy it is for the operator, the user to use it. Finally, there are also many other things like salability, how easy it is to operate, whether it has space saving, whether it gets easily out of date, like telephones today getting out of date so easily. In terms of increasingly things like safety, environmental consciousness, all these matters are playing a role, and each of them, there is a basic objective behind it. So when you are dealing with various kinds of people within a company, you've got to understand what really are the motives behind such a purchase, the objective behind such a motive, and see how your product or service can address these objectives of your buying segments. So therefore, it's important that you ask the right questions, because as we all know, in getting the right questions, you get the right answers. So for example, you might want to ask, what aspects of functions get affected by the purchase of my product, okay, by the people who are responsible for those activities, and what will they say about it? So if you understand exactly where your product fits into the value chain, or the business process of your buying company, you will get a better idea of what exactly to do about it. Secondly, what part do they play? We saw the different roles that different people play, and what is it that, how can you express yourself in a way that communicates the value proposition of your product better and fulfills a need for them? And how do you speak it in the language that they understand? Because if you're speaking to an operator on the shop floor, it's different than speaking to the CEO of the same company. What buying appeals therefore will affect them. As I mentioned, an operator will react differently compared to a CEO, compared to somebody in the purchase department. What's the best way of selling? And if you know specific questions like what kind of salesman and so on and so forth. And if you are going to get into advertising, how should you do that advertising? What kind of appeal should you have? What kind of media should you choose? And there are so many other aspects, terms and conditions and the buying process, which you can ask questions on. The more you find yourself asking the right questions, the more you are likely to be on the right path. Now, apart from the motives, you also have to look at the buying phases. Now, even if you look at yourself when you're buying a new phone, what would you do the first time around that you're buying a phone? You would look at the alternatives available, you would do some research on it, maybe you'll ask a few friends. So as you can make out, when you're buying a phone for the first time as opposed to buying a second phone, the way you will approach it is completely different. So too it is with organizations. And as a marketer to organizations, it's important to understand what stage is the buyer in, and what are the various stages in the buying process, and how is it as a marketer you can do something to influence his decision making. So if you were to take buying for the first time, buying for a second time, a straightforward rebuy or a modified rebuy, you will find that while the buying stages might be the same, the tasks tend to vary and the influence that you have also changes. It also depends whether you are the supplier who is already in with the customer or who is out of the customer at this point in time, which is why we have two phrases there called in supplier and out supplier. So if you take the first step for a buyer, it is what is the problem that he faces. Now, if it's a new task, that is the first time that he's buying, what is it that you can do as a marketer? You have to anticipate what could be his potential problem so that you are the first one out there helping him to identify what are the things that he might want to consider before he makes up his mind. So you must tell them that you have the ability to solve his problems. That's what you need to do as a marketer. Now the second thing is he has to determine what solution to go for. There, your job would be to provide a lot of technical assistance, information. The phrase that is used most often for such situations is consultative selling. How can you be a consultant, a very nice consultant, serving both your needs as also the buyer's needs in a more useful manner? The third thing is to figure out what is the specific item that's needed. There you start giving more detailed information about the products and services that you have. Fourthly is to determine which supplier to go with. Here again, the supplier would say that he is dependable, he is reliable, get maybe references from other customers, so on and so forth. And finally, help in analyzing the various proposals. So what you need to do is understand various customer problems, figure out where is it you can play a role and convince him. That's as far as the first time purchase process is concerned. When it's a straightforward rebuy, for the supplier who's already in with the customer, his task is to maintain a close relationship with his buyers and make sure that he keeps understanding what their changing problems and needs are. Whereas the supplier who's not in with the customer right now is outside, he needs to convince the firm to recognize that there are alternatives. Sometimes there may be superior alternatives. So many times like I mentioned earlier, it's a long sales cycle. So for both the in-supplier and out-supplier, relationship management is critical in order to either retain the business or in order to win that business. And whether it's the other stages, it's more or less the same steps that need to be made. But when it comes many times to new proposals or alternate proposals, the key thing is to be responsive and to make it in time. In a modified rebuy situation, there are opportunities for both the supplier who's in as well as the supplier who's out. A modified rebuy is where it's not the same product, maybe it's a substantial change of the existing product or a change in the buying situation. There, for the in-supply, the tasks are quite different from the person who is outside. Now, it's very sometimes time consuming, sometimes very painful also for both, especially the out supply, to keep that relationship and engagement going. So he has to look at various ways by which he has an engagement without being a pain. And there are various things that are mentioned here. How does he look out for developing trends? How does he show that he has got newer alternatives? How does he demonstrate an ability to perform a more complex or a newer task? So as you can make out, whether you are a supplier who is already in with an existing buyer or a supplier who is not in with an existing buyer, there are various tasks that one can do at various stages of the buying process. Therefore, if you look at a company, the various steps in his buying process is identification of a need, determining the alternatives and the specifications, looking at different suppliers that are out there, getting for information and evaluating the suppliers, negotiating the order, and then keeping on evaluating, monitoring the performance of the supplier. So, to conclude this chapter, organizational or business to business buying behavior, as you can see from this, is considerably different from how an individual buys. The nature of the appeal, the size of the order, the number of times the item is bought, the geographical distribution, and so on and so forth, as you've seen, are quite varied in this particular process. And what complicates matters further is there are various buying centers within an organization with different objectives, with different needs and different roles. And it's important for us as marketers to understand all these when we pitch to such organizations. This is an area which is not yet considered as sexy or as popular among many marketing professionals, but it is huge and it is growing, and its time and day have come.